Hey guys, this is Jason and welcome to my shop. Today, we're building a Bartop arcade. The first stop is to Photoshop to design the side panel. Now there are a lot of resources out there, including a great free Instructable, but I had a slightly different size and shape in mind. I wanted a more stylized look with rounded edges and that sloping back I had seen in other cabinets. The great thing about this design is it only uses half a sheet of MDF, which you can buy pre-cut at most hardware stores. I'm going with 3/4 inch over 1/2 inch, just as a personal preference. Once I settled on the dimensions, I added the cross sections, hit print, and headed to the shop. First thing to do is to cut out that side panel. Then I'm going to give it a quick pass through my drum sander to clean up any rough cuts and smooth out the curves. With the first side done, I use it to trace out the opposite piece. I use double-sided tape to attach the two sides together and clean up the edges on my router. Now it's time to draw out my measurements for the cross panels. Here, I'm measuring from the top line 4 inches down for my lower marquee. Once I have all my measurements, I can move on to cutting all of my cross panels. Then, I'll use my crosscut sled to cut dozens of blocks from leftover MDF that I'll use later to connect all my pieces. The next step is optional. For it, you'll need a slot cutting router bit like this one. I picked up a set from a discount store in the area for around 20 bucks. With it, I'm going to cut a slot around both side panels, my control panel, and the upper and lower marquee pieces in order to install a plastic T-molding. There are a bunch of colors available you can get online, and I think it'll add a professional look to the whole thing. The last step before we put everything together is to cut out my speaker template on the lower marquee. I'll do this over on the drill press. Okay, so we got all the panels cut and we're ready to assemble it. If this was for me, I would just use some brad nails and some wood glue and be done. But this is a gift. I have to ship across the country. So in order to do that, I'm going to be using these threaded inserts. You could use whichever method works for you. I start by drilling holes in all of my blocks for the bolts I'm using. In this case, 1/4 inch. You'll want a slightly larger bit though to give yourself a little wiggle room. In 4 of the blocks, I drilled a hole straight down the center. I'll use these to attach the back. I then use a block to mark the side panels for where I'll be adding the threaded inserts. I go back to the drill press, making sure my depth stop is set to the correct height for the inserts. Then it's just a matter of screwing in the inserts and attaching the blocks with the bolts, making sure each block is lined up with the lines I drew earlier. At this point, I'll do a dry assembly to make sure everything fits correctly and make any adjustments I need. one thing I noticed here is how the top stuck out from the back piece. I could get the exact angle to fix this, but since it's the back, I'm just going to eyeball it and sneak up to the cut with my table saw until I get a perfect fit. Now I could finally put it all together with some wood glue and a couple of brad nails. But of course, I'll have to unscrew each panel before the glue dries, or it'll defeat the whole purpose of the inserts. So you may be wondering why I did it this way. Bolts first, then the glue and the brad nails. Now, I could have easily switched that up, but threaded inserts don't always go in straight. Doing it this way meant I could ensure everything lined up correctly before committing to the final assembly. Now to attach the back, I'm going to use threaded inserts in the center holes that I drilled earlier. Now onto the control panel. I'm going to attach my templates for the top and bottom sections and drill out the holes for the buttons on my drill press. It's important to be able to access all the buttons once everything is put together. So to do this, I'm using a long continuous hinge to connect the control panel to the bottom of the cabinet. The top panel will stick out from the bottom slightly, so here I'm testing the alignment and making note of the measurement for layer. Before attaching the two control panels, I need to make room for the joysticks. It's important in this step to make sure the joystick is centered in the hole and not touching any sides when in use. Once I was confident I had it right, I marked its placement and drilled out about 1/4 inch to inset the bottom. I needed to finish it off with a chisel to get the right fit. Now I wanted to attach the joysticks from the bottom. That way there was no bolts sticking out through the top. I picked up this threaded insert kit from an arcade store online. Now we could attach the control panel. Once it's all together, I'll mark underneath where the panel should sit. So the next step is to lock down the control panel. Now in order to do that, I thought I would try magnets at first. That didn't work. So you'll notice in the next shot, probably actually the earlier shots too, there's a little black circle in the corner of the control panels. That's the magnet. Ignore it. This is how I finally got it to lock down. I started by gluing blocks to the bottom of the control panel on both sides, making sure to inset it from the top edge slightly so it will clear the TV when opening. With the panel lowered in place, I marked where I'd be adding another threaded insert, one on each side. I can now lock down the control panel with a bolt on each side. Now onto the monitor. I picked up a 22-inch off Craigslist, and to attach it, I need to use a little geometry. First, I need to find the center of my board, and the center of the monitor between the 4 mounting screws. I could then find the radius between each screw, and transfer that circle over to my board. Next, I'll measure the distance between 2 of the screws on the monitor. I could then use the circle on the panel to find 2 points that are the same distance apart along the circumference of the circle. I will repeat for the lower 2 screws and then have 4 points to drill on the panel to mount the monitor. Now I'm just going to glue and brad nail some blocks to the sides. To install the monitor, I'm going to turn the cabinet on its side to make it easier. Once I have everything lined up correctly, I'll mark and drill the holes for the inserts. Then it's just a matter of bolting everything down. The last step is making a bezel around the monitor. I'm going to be using a 1/4 inch MDF. Once it's cut to size, I will have to measure the distance from the sides of the cabinet to the start of the screen and transfer this number over to my MDF. I then use my drill press to cut relief holes in each corner. Now there are many different ways to cut this out, but I'm going to be using a straight edge, some double-sided tape, and my flush cut router bit. Then it's just a matter of cleaning up the corners with a chisel. I have about a 1/4 inch gap between the top of the marquee and the monitor. So I'm going to attach a small strip of MDF across the top of the bezel to hold it in place. This way, it will also be easy to remove if ever needed. All monitors are different sizes though, so you may need to come up with something different. Finally, 2 last-minute tweaks. First, I drilled a hole in the back panel to make it easier to open. Then, I added a piece of scrap wood to the inside of the control panel to act as a stop block when closed. This added support and helped line up the inside bolts.
So there you have it. Build part is complete. I know it was a lot of steps, so make sure to check out the plans in the description down below. Part 2 is to paint, apply all the graphics, and do all the electronics on the inside. That video is probably popping up somewhere over here, or it'll be in the link down below. Also, make sure to like and subscribe, comment. I'd love to hear what you think. We got more projects coming up, so stay tuned.